Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 24, Episode 10. Coming up on the show, we've got the flying humanoid cover-up, paying an old Egyptian man to see his giant finger, and Erich von Däniken versus the narcos. I'm Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
I hope he was cheap.
The guy with the giant finger?
Yeah.
$300.
$300?
And you're only allowed to look at it and take a photo. You can't touch it.
That's a bit suspicious.
But when you get back to Germany, you will have an amazing story to tell about this guy's giant finger.
But I don't get it. So what, the guy has just, a massive index finger?
It's not
gigantism?
It's not his giant finger. He is in possession of the giant finger.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
So technically it's his giant finger.
Right, but it's not attached to him.
That's a good way to put it.
Right, okay.
And he'll let you smell it, but you're not allowed to touch it.
Does he literally pull an Egyptian the equivalent of smell my finger?
Yes. You have to pay $300 to smell this guy's dirty Egyptian finger.
I knew there's some weird proclivities out there, but that's kind of the upper limits, I suppose.
And then when you get home to Germany, it takes you several years to recover from this.
Well, I'd imagine getting a giant fingering would result in that.
Yeah, and then instead of writing about it, writing about the factual events, you release a sci-fi novel because that's the only way you can explain what happened when you smelt this guy's old giant Egyptian finger.
What is this story you found? This is insane.
Okay, this is from the latest Erich von Däniken.
Oh, always good. Good choice.
The legendary Austrian author. The new one's War of the Gods, Alien Skulls, Underground Cities, and Fire from the Sky. And he totally roped me in, von Däniken. You know, some of his earlier books were great. Some of his later books, I mean, he's been around for a while. He repeats himself.
Right.
But the guy still has amazing stories.
Oh, he does. Yeah, absolutely.
And he just roped me in with this incredible opener, which I think I'll tell at the start of this show. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll give you a bit of a bookend on how the story ends in the Plus extension and where it's going.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
But it involves narcos.
Narcos?
Yeah, and cocainus.
As in cocaine?
Yeah, cocaine.
A little bit of blow?
It's been a while since I've seen the Netflix show Narcos, so I'm a little bit rusty on the vernacular.
Right, okay.
But it involves, cocaine, Bolivia, Colombia.
Is the cocaine what fueled him to write the story?
Basically, von Däniken was just high the whole time. From the 1980s till now, he's just been high on cocaine.
I reckon it'd be pretty fun being high. I reckon that'd be, yeah.
I'm only joking, of course. But hopefully I can tell the start of that story and maybe you can share what you've been working on. Because I saw this headline in the last couple of days of this mysterious Jetpack man. What's going on with that?
This is really fascinating. This came to my attention from Tyler Rogaway over at The Drive, with the Warzone. And it was basically reference to this strange event that took place on last Sunday. So I won't go into the full details just yet. We'll do that later on in the show. But essentially it ties into, at first I just thought, this could be some type of social media stunt. But it seems like there's some kind of weird cover-up going on. Which then links into a story that, of all people, Brett Tingley wrote about a UFO showing up over Loring Air Force Base back in the middle of the Cold War.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it caused a very disturbing incursion.
I thought it was just another one of these promos from that Jetpack company, Jetpack Aviation.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same thing. It doesn't appear to be that at all because no one's come forward. I was showing you the videos of that one in Dubai with the guy with the jetpack just flying with a... it was an A380 he was flying. An A380, and there's videos of their guys flying with Air Force planes. It's wild, that stuff. Yeah.
It can just take off like a jet fighter.
Well, this would be the equivalent of allegedly the technology that would be required for this event to take place. So it's not out of the realms of possibility that this is some type of stunt that's gone wrong and maybe they're in the wrong location. But what this does tie in is this history we have of flying humanoids being seen, wearing technologies, much like what we hear with the airship flaps that happened, where it always seems like the technology, whether it's some type of unexplained aerial phenomena, it always seems to be just a little bit ahead of where humanity stands in its technology. And this could be another one of those cases. It could just be that this is another paranormal event to take place that's kind of messing with humanity.
Do you have an update on the company's flying motorcycle?
I don't, but you did send me a picture of that today.
Go to jetpackaviation.com and you will see the world's first flying motorcycle, as if motorcycle riding wasn't dangerous enough already. Now you add flying to the mix.
Interesting. That's pretty. But how long would it stay in the air? Surely the amount of energy that would be required.
If I was riding it, probably about 30 seconds.
It says 30 minutes max endurance, but 150 miles per hour, 1,200 pounds of thrust. Okay.
You need more thrust. That's like a scooter.
Okay, if you're...
It's the world's first flying scooter. Let's be honest.
I'll link to this in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. It's actually called the Speeder, and there's a recreational speeder, and then there's a military speeder, which is like something out of Star Wars.
Military version with guns on it.
But you're right. If you would only last 30 seconds, I'd be dead in probably 2. Maybe 8 if I'm lucky.
That's what she said.
Come on, just because you got a giant finger coming up doesn't mean you can get dirty, Ben.
Erich von Däniken, War of the Gods. The legendary author of Chariots of the Gods. Because what can we say about Erich von Däniken? We've heard him speak a bunch of times. He's always entertaining. He's got this Steve Jobs-esque reality distortion field where you're no longer asking, is it real? You're with him 100%. Everything he says is gospel. Yeah. He's just got that kind of charisma about him.
And his camp German assistant is hilarious.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still together. Working together, I mean.
Oh, no, we know what you meant, exactly.
So it was February the 23rd, 1988 to be specific, where von Däniken had led a tourist party into the South American highlands. This is the kind of opening scene from his new book. And they'd arrived at La Paz in Bolivia. It's one of I think it is the highest airport jets can land on in the world.
Right.
Like the altitude is so high. But luckily for the tourists and von Däniken, they were making their way down to Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which is much lower. And he's kind of telling the story of how everyone was together. He had about a dozen tourists and they'd all kind of made their way to the Holiday Inn. And on that first afternoon in the country, they're all a bit tired from the flight. So they just said, well, let's chill out at the hotel and we'll meet by the hotel pool in the afternoon. We'll have a little drink and a chat and talk about the excursions we're going to go off into the jungle. Now, when he gets down to the pool, von Däniken said one of the tourists that came as a couple with her newlywed husband, her name was Julia, she came up to Erich and she said, Erich, have you seen my husband Rob? He's not in our room and I can't see his bathing suit, so he must be down here by the pool somewhere. Now, he explains that Julia and Rob, they were from Holland. This trip to South America was their honeymoon, basically. And he explains that Rob was an imposing figure. He was 6'5", typical Dutch tall guy, really athletic, really slim, really fit. And he would often, on the flight over, he would tell von Däniken about, how he loved to go cycling and, climb mountains. The guy was, an athlete. And von Däniken thought he mustn't have gotten far. So he strolled around the pool looking for him and eventually got a couple of the other tourists to organize kind of a haphazard search party and try and find the missing new husband. But they couldn't find this guy anywhere. He had a missing Dutchman in his first hour on this tour with all these tourists, so it wasn't looking good. And then suddenly they heard this scream from 2 stories up in the hotel. And there was this woman on the second floor balcony gesticulating wildly down at the swimming pool. And he looks in and there, 2 meters below the greenish water, was a human body with outstretched arms. It was Rob.
Had he drowned?
Drowned in the pool. They dragged him out. They performed CPR on him, but it was too late. Eventually, a doctor diagnosed a heart attack. Now, the athletic Dutchman, apparently the altitude, he just couldn't handle the altitude. He died of a heart attack. Now, they all took care of Julia, he said, and she was surprisingly accepting and brave. But what a start to this adventure in South America with all these tourists. You got a dead body in the first 2 hours.
Reminds me of that saying, though, it's not a party unless someone dies.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's already eventful.
Yeah. Let's just turn it up a little bit.
Yeah. If we were there, it would have given us a story to talk about.
We would have.
Now, he says they ate dinner from the buffet, and obviously the group was really quiet. Everyone was talking about Rob's death. Julia wished that her husband's body, he said, would be transferred to the Netherlands. And Erich says he actually promised to do this, because he felt responsible, even though it wasn't his fault. It's his tour group. And he said to her, look, I'll take care of everything. I'll make sure the body gets back to Holland and, just leave everything with me, because she's obviously distraught. Now, he says he kind of regrets doing that because he had no idea how to do that, no idea how to transport a dead body back to Europe. And while he's thinking about how the hell am I going to do this, suddenly the hotel director is standing a few feet away from him with this look on his face. Now, Erich had stayed at this hotel a bunch of times, so he kind of knew this guy. He called him Mr. Antonio. And Mr. Antonio, the hotel manager, kind of discreetly asks von Däniken to follow him back to the front desk. Now, von Däniken does this, and when he gets there, he says there's this black guy he's never seen before in a dark suit with really kind of new white gloves on. And he said the guy's face didn't match the suit. Like, he looked a bit rough, this guy. You know, like he had seen some shit. a bit of a
hobo-esque?
He had a criminal face.
Oh, right.
Right? That was what I'm trying to say. Erich thought maybe he might be from the funeral home, and he had heard about the death, and he had come, you know, to try and organize a service or something. But no, the hotel manager started to explain that this man was a servant of a rich Columbian. And this rich Columbian had requested to meet von Däniken in person. And this servant had been sent to take von Däniken to this man's home, and then he would return him to the hotel later that evening. Now, he says, look, Antonio, my group is sitting in the restaurant. We've just had someone die. I can't leave them alone. And the hotel manager gives it a really hard sell for some reason. He's almost pleading with von Däniken to do what he says, to get into this guy's car and go and meet this rich man. He says, look, Senor, you won't regret this. You know, trust me, everything will be paid for at your hotel. All the drinks will be comped. You just have to get in this car and go see this man. You don't say no to this man, was the kind of impression he was giving. So von Däniken's like, what's the name of this guy? What does he do for a living? And the hotel manager's like, I can't really answer that. He's just a really important rich guy. Trust me, you just want to get in the limo and you just go see him. So he does. He follows the instructions of Antonio. He follows this guy in the suit and the white gloves and gets into the limo. And it's beautiful inside. There's like all these expensive whiskeys and, you know, mineral waters and iced glasses and everything ready to go. And off they go. They start driving. And, you know, the window's up in the limo, so he can't ask the driver any questions. And he's looking out the window as the city is getting further and further away as they drive up this mountain. And he said eventually they hit a bumpy dirt road. And von Däniken's just thinking, where the hell are we going?
Well, you also have to wonder if he's thinking he's been kidnapped.
Well, they're driving through this grove and it's turning into jungle, and that's exactly what he's thinking. He's thinking, I don't have a weapon or anything. I've got no way to defend myself. I don't even know where I'm going. What if this is a kidnapping? But then he stops and he thinks, no, that's silly. If this was a kidnapping, why would it be a luxury kidnapping? Why would they send a limo to kidnap
They do things in style down there.
So he said finally, after going to the end of this really long dirt road, they stop in front of this gate. And once they had passed through, two native South Americans had closed it behind them. And as he got out of the limo, he realized that they all had AK-47s, heavily armed, all these men. And he said in front of us was this one-story building with green plants on the outer walls. Like, it looked very ostentatious. And he said inside I encountered a beautiful, spacious hall. And there were all these beautiful women wearing very kind of scantily clad outfits. And he said they smiled at him seductively. And I just thought, where the hell am I? Is this some kind of bordello? But finally, the rich man appeared and walked up to him. And he said, look, he seemed like a nice guy. He had dark, frizzy hair. He had lively eyes, a well-groomed mustache, impeccable teeth. His chin had a dimple in the middle. He wore jeans and a silk beige shirt, and his left wrist was adorned with a diamond-studded Omega watch. Now, the stranger simply gave him a really firm handshake and said, welcome, Senor Erich, and said his friend Antonio from the Holiday Inn had told him that he was a guide of the tourist group. And so this rich man, he said, look, I want to take the opportunity to meet you personally. He apologized for the unusual kidnapping and assured von Däniken that, you know, all it would take is one word, just one word, senor, and I'll take you back to the hotel. You know, you're not a prisoner here. One word and we'll take you back. And he kind of, within this first introduction, without revealing who he was, the first thing he said to von Däniken, look, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can help you with? And suddenly pops into von Däniken's head, I've got a dead body to take care of. He's like, and he tells the whole story. He's like, this man from Holland, he fell in the pool. He died of a heart attack. And I promised his wife I would take care of the body. And now I don't know what to do. How do I take care of this body? And this rich guy just says, dead body, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it.
I have a feeling he's taken care of some dead bodies in the past.
Just really casually, like, not a concern in the world.
Oh, is that all?
I'll take care of the dead body. And 3 days later, it turned out Rob's body landed in Amsterdam. No problem at all. This rich man had some power. He had some connections. Now, he explained that he had read some of von Däniken's books, and he assured von Däniken he wanted to show him something unique. So he brings out this cold champagne, and sandwiches are passed around. And the stranger said, my friend, you can just call me Pablo. Now, to anyone listening who thinks of a very rich man, and remember, this isn't Colombia. He's in Bolivia.
Yeah, but if you have to remember the limo that he was driven there, I'm sure it would have had hippo skin leather.
Who's a rich man with diamond-encrusted Omega watches in Bolivia called Pablo?
Escobar.
So this is why I kept reading the story. I was like, come on, von Däniken. Are you serious?
Pablo Escobar.
Okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's a different rich Pablo.
Possible. All right.
Pablo explained he could support von Däniken's research, especially in Bolivia and Colombia, where he owned quite a lot of land. Now, von Däniken inquired about Pablo's job. What did he do for a living? How did he have so much money? And he just said,
baskets.
I'm a car dealer and a rancher. Now, he said we talked about the visit of aliens on planet Earth, and Pablo complimented me and assured me that I was one of the few contemporaries who understood the big picture. And after half an hour, I told him that my group would be waiting at the Holiday Inn. So von Däniken was basically like, okay, this is nice meeting you, but I've got to get back. And Pablo just asked for a few more minutes of von Däniken's patience. Just said, look, I've got something to show you. And two of his men appeared, and they carried a really large shoebox with hinges and set it on the table. And Pablo flipped down three sides of the container, pointing inside, and said, what do you think, Senor Erich? Now, he wasn't really that impressed because inside was a deformed skull. Now, he said to Pablo, look, it's great. It's an interesting specimen, but you can find these in various museums, including the Anthropological Museum in La Paz. And Pablo nodded and said, I know, senor, but this is the head of an alien. And von Däniken's like, what? I beg your pardon? Like, what are you talking about? Why do you think that? What makes you think that? So let's take a step back. This is possibly Pablo Escobar.
Who is the Rex Gilroy of Bolivia?
Opening up a box of a dead alien skull to Erich von Däniken. Meanwhile, Pablo's servants bring a portable screen and set up a Kodak slide projector for them. And von Däniken explains that he's shown a picture of the same skull with a tape measure for reference. And it's like 48 centimeters from the jaw to the crown. And the images are followed by two crisp shots of infant skulls. There's two of them. There's a 2-month-old and it looks like a 4-month-old. And Pablo points to the enlargements on the head and says, do you notice anything different, Senor Erich? Now, slowly, it starts to dawn on von Däniken. The infant skulls don't have fontanelles. Now, the head of a newborn consists of several cranial bones, where everything kind of stitches together as the child grows. About 2.5 months after birth, he says, the adhesion to the back of the head closes. This is called the posterior fontanelle, and the anterior part, the great fontanelle, takes about 2.5 years to become completely covered. But the baby skulls in the pictures he was shown did not show fontanelles. Now, Pablo looked at von Däniken with a triumphant grin and said, these are not earthlings, Don Erich. They are aliens, but born here on Earth. Now, von Däniken learns that Pablo has secured the dig site, but hasn't informed the local archaeologists. Only when everything is documented will he reveal what he's found. He invites von Däniken to Colombia, all expenses paid, and asks him to bring cameras, 2 Swiss journalists, and a Swiss notary. Now, von Däniken is blown away by this generosity, and he's really intrigued. He realizes that the skulls without fontanelles it's significant. It's significant evidence that it's not just some kind of child that's had their head bound, or it's not some deformity. It's something very, very unique and very strange.
But looking at the photographs isn't going to be enough. I mean, he's going to have, apart from the skull that's in front of him, he's going to have to examine them.
Yeah, and he just says to his mysterious benefactor, look, I need to think about this invitation. I've got many international commitments, which he did at the time. And, Pablo said, fine, I hope you agree. He put him back in the limo, and von Däniken went back to the hotel, completely oblivious as to who this rich man might be. A few weeks pass and he's back in Zurich for an exhibition of deformed skulls. And he met the director of the institute that was displaying the skulls, and this all took place at the University of Zurich. And he basically got in a conversation with the guy, said, this is a great exhibit, I'm very familiar with many of these specimens. And he innocently told the story of, oh, by the way, I met this guy in Bolivia and he was really rich and, said he's found this and he's found that. And the guy, he looked over at this director of the exhibit, and this guy's jaw was almost on the ground. And von Däniken's like, what's the big deal? What's the matter? What did I say? And this guy just goes, wait here. And he runs away. And he comes back with this newspaper and he shows von Däniken on like the 8th page. There's a picture of the rich benefactor. And it's Pablo Escobar.
So it is him.
And von Däniken's like, yes, this is the man. I don't see it's a big deal. And this director says, Pablo Escobar, the drug dealer, worth $30 billion, von Däniken. And von Däniken's like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
There's a sweet naivety about him, obviously.
Yeah. And eventually it occurs to him that, oh, this is a serious, powerful drug dealer. And that's why he was offering to pay for this archaeological expedition to dig up alien bodies, because he's got billions of dollars to spare.
Okay, I admit, I'm intrigued. And you have to wonder, how did an alien gravesite come to the attention of Pablo Escobar?
So 2 weeks later, von Däniken gets a call from the American Express travel agency in Zurich. They let him know that his first-class flights to Colombia have all been paid for. All he needs to do is to let them know the details of who's going to be on this flight. Because Pablo asked for him to bring a camera crew. He wanted him to bring 2 Swiss journalists and a Swiss notary. And Pablo's plan was to document everything before he revealed it to the Colombian authorities and to the rest of the world. So von Däniken finds himself in a bit of a conundrum. Does he take the offer to work with the world's most powerful drug lord with the chance to discover the evidence he's been searching for that proves alien visitation in the past on planet Earth? Or does he just play the safe card and walk away?
You can't walk away from something like that, surely.
We'll find out on this episode of Mysterious Universe later on in the show.
Oh, okay.
That's the setup.
All right, I like the setup. I can see why you were pulled in.
That's why I was like, oh, damn you, von Däniken. Now I've got to read this madness.
Well, we'll go back to that a little bit later, but let's talk about what is essentially this crazy story that's come out of Los Angeles. And I'm pleased that you actually did mention the Jetpack, aviation group, Ben. So what initially happened is that there was a American Airlines flight that was coming into land at the Los Angeles International Airport. This was on Sunday, the 30th of August. And the pilot reported seeing a mystery person with a jetpack flying in the path of incoming jets. I've actually got some audio here of the pilot communicating with the tower. Take a listen to what he says.
Tower, American 1997. We just passed a guy in a jetpack.
American 1997, okay. Thank you. Were they up to your left side or right side?
Off the left side, maybe 300 yards or so, about our altitude.
Wow, I haven't heard any of this.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, 3,000 feet is quite high for a jetpack to get up to. I mean, they can get up there, but that's pretty dangerous to be in the flight path near an international airport.
That shows me that it can't be Jetpack Aviation, because my understanding of their business is that flights at the moment are very organized. Like
Absolutely.
in the Dubai demonstration, the entire city was shut down for that flight. All the incoming flights, like no one would get near the flight zone.
Well, look, Jetpack Aviation is in California, and they do have a training program that you can go to. It costs around $5,000, just a little bit less than $5,000, and it's a 2-day training school where they'll give you these flights where you can try one of these jetpacks and fly around in it, but it's tethered. It's actually tethered, so you can't fly off. And there is no way. Obviously, they're going to adhere to regulations. They're FAA approved. They know not to fly anywhere near a flight path.
But say I've got $1 billion. Can I just buy one of their jetpacks, do their 2-day course, and then it's mine? I can take it home?
I'm not aware whether or not you can purchase one, but I imagine that potentially you could. I mean, you can buy pretty soon. It hasn't been released yet, but you're right, that scooter, as you're telling that story, you can buy that air scooter thing.
It's only $380,000.
Oh, if you're a billionaire, who cares? I mean, it is Southern California, so there's Silicon Valley there.
But that's what I'm thinking scenario might be, is just a rich somebody has one of these jetpacks.
I thought, is Elon Musk out?
A 2-day training course for a freaking jetpack seems a little bit insane, right?
Well, kind of. The 2-day training course is more that you will be tethered to the flight line, and they'll see how you go, and then you can agree to undertake more training.
Yeah, there must be more training.
There's a heap more training. This is more like just a fun kind of thing that you just like. It's a mega gift that you can give to someone.
I see.
It's not really designed for you to be a full-on pilot to pilot one of these things. But that's exactly what I was thinking until the story becomes a little bit more unusual, a little bit more bizarre. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at the history of people seeing flying humanoids, there's a whole massive amount of cases where you seem to have these just slightly more advanced technologies popping up. Mm-hmm. And they're actually human beings. They appear to be human beings for the most part, but they're flying around with strange contraptions strapped to their backs, and they've got control panels on their chests, and they go all the way back to the 1800s, like 1880. There's reports.
You have 1800s jetpack reports?
1800s flying humanoid reports, but just humans. And they always seem to be mad scientists. And it makes you think of breakaway civilizations. And I thought, well, maybe that's not the case that's occurring here. But it was Fox News 11 in Los Angeles that actually broke this story. And what I want to play for you, actually, is just a little bit of audio that comes from the reporter, Phil Schumann, because he made an interesting comment. So all the details that have come out is that it was definitely verified. So there was the AA pilot that saw it. As we heard in the audio there, it was 3,000 feet that he saw this thing flying around. There was a SkyWest flight that was coming in. The second pilot saw it as well. And according to the aviation experts in the community, they're saying that, look, only people that have cutting-edge technology at a high expense would be able to reach this altitude. It's not uncommon, but it is, it's a little bit strange that they'll be doing that, as we said. But there's also this assumption that any person with the technological and monetary capabilities to fly that would not be flying in that region at all. So some have suggested that this was some type of internet stunt. Like this has been put up very dangerously to promote something. But no one's come forward.
Yeah, I mean, Jetpack Aviation, like you said, this would ruin their, approval by the FAA. It would
exactly.
It would paint them in a very bad light if they're flying in front of because it's like a terrorist threat too.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're flying up near passenger planes.
Well, it carries some very severe punishments. So if this was, God, I don't even think Logan Paul would be dumb enough to do something like this. Well, yeah, good point. Okay, but for the most part, people would be aware that this is a very dangerous thing to do. So the FAA, allegedly, according to the story, informed the LAPD. The LAPD deployed a helicopter to do a flyover in this region where this thing was seen, and they couldn't locate anything. Look, there is a possibility that it went straight up, it came straight back down, and the guy hid the jetpack, or the person hid the jetpack and disappeared. But there's a crazy debunking coming out now that apparently this was a Mylar balloon.
What?
Yeah, exactly. It's so dumb. It's just come out on the internet. And this is what I tried to trace the source of it. I couldn't find it. There's these people that are so-called experts, in inverted commas, no names, but it's being dismissed as being a Mylar balloon.
Oh, this is immediately suspicious.
It's suspicious, isn't it? It's a bit weird. I'm like, well, why would people start saying something like that? So the same aviation experts that were commenting about the technology and the expense that would be required to do this have also said that they absolutely believed the pilot. Both pilots, they absolutely believe them. These guys have trained eyes, they have visual awareness, and they have the experience to be able to tell the difference between a Mylar balloon floating in the wind and a guy with a jetpack strapped to his back. So obviously it's not a Mylar balloon. And these pilots are insistent. Like, no, we saw a guy on a jetpack. And you always, when you hear the initial reaction as well, you can hear it in his voice. There is no way any pilot worth his salt would report back to the tower that they're seeing a jetpack unless they see it.
And it seems very quick for a cover story, doesn't it?
Exactly. And now,
very quick.
Where did we see a very quick cover story relating to a balloon?
Roswell.
It was Roswell. The very following day, all of a sudden, there was a newspaper announcement initially saying they'd found something that was foreign. And then almost immediately, it was like, oh, no, it's just a weather balloon. So, of course, this is all very puzzling. And there's this potentially dangerous mystery that's kind of starting to evolve here because the consequences of some type of mid-air collision are devastating. I mean, you could bring down a passenger aircraft, not only kill everyone on the plane, but also kill people on the ground.
Well, you just have to take a weapon up there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So apparently the LAPD, even at this moment, is requesting that anyone that has any information about this at all to contact them. So at this moment, the LAPD was still interested, but the Fox News reporter, Phil Schumann, said something was very strange. Take a listen to what he said.
The FAA says they turned this over to the LAPD Air Support Division. The LAPD Air Support Division says they did not get a report. American Airlines won't talk to me. They say talk to the FAA.
See this weird circle of information? So the FAA said that it was given to the LAPD, and then the LAPD is like, no, we gave it to someone else. And
what's the LAPD going to do?
Well, it's a criminal offense, like to fly something like this into...
But how are they going to investigate? Take their helicopter up?
Probably. Well, they did. They did take the helicopter up. This is something that's important. And yet all of a sudden you're starting to get this weird cycle of like, oh, no, it's being part... Now, look, it could just simply be bureaucracy. It could just be bureaucracy. But it also sounds like there's an element of a cover-up that's occurring here. And so this is a theme that I came across today, which I'm going to go into with this story of this strange nuclear incursion or a UFO incursion at a nuclear-armed base in America back in the Cold War. But before I go into that, I want to tell you some of these other stories because, look, it absolutely is highly likely that this is probably just a stunt. This probably is someone with too much money and too much time on their hands, and they made a mistake flying into the path of a jetliner. That's what's most likely. But we can't rule out the possibility that there's something else occurring here because there is a long history of these strange flying humanoids being seen all around the world. You know, there's a really well-known cases that come out of Mexico, which we've discussed on the show a couple of times. There's cases that come out of Greece. And as I said, Ben, there's a case that goes all the way back to the 1880s. So back on the 12th of September in 1880, there was this marvelous apparition near Coney Island. Apparently, it was at the height of at least 1,000 feet. It was a strange object that was seen flying towards the New Jersey coast. But this object turned out to be what appeared to be a man with bat wings.
Oh, this old chestnut.
And what was called improved frog legs. Now, this is...
Isn't there reports from people that said they could see his face?
Yeah.
And it's like...
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point because that comes up in another case that I have for you in a moment. You're right. The face of the man was distinctly seen and it was said to have a cruel and determined expression.
Stop looking at me.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, is it just an angry, cranky scientist who's developed some type of advanced technology for the 1880s? Like, what is this? But the movement that this guy was making was unusual because, yeah, it had these wings that were kind of flapping. But the frog legs, it was like swimming through the air. It was like propelling itself against something that wasn't there, like it was a liquid, but it wasn't. It was obviously up in the air. But one thing that was noticed by a number of witnesses, because there were multiple apparently reliable witnesses that said that the monster, its wings would wave in the answer to any noise that came from the ground. So there was a train whistle that went off, and apparently the wings kind of responded to this train whistle. They said this thing was a deep black color, and it was seen to fly off towards the New Jersey coastline and then disappear from sight. So it's just an odd kind of report, and maybe being the 1880s, there's a possibility here that this is some type of sensationalized report. Maybe someone made it up. But what comes out from this news is that an object that was very similar was seen about a month later over St. Louis by a number of unrelated citizens. So same time, they hadn't read the reports allegedly because the news hadn't gone that far.
Did they see his face this time? Was he in a better mood?
They didn't see his face. But like before, I said in that case that it didn't seem to go below 1,000 feet. Exactly the same thing happened here. There was no instance of a lighting. No one saw it at an elevation that was lower than 1,000 feet above the Earth's surface, and no one knew what it was. And at the time, like what we've just speculated about, some people had said that this mysterious flyer was an aeronaut that had somehow invented wings and was secretly experimenting with them. So this kind of does fit in with the idea of the airships around that time. Maybe it is some type of breakaway civilization. Maybe they were testing some type of, not a flight suit, but maybe an emergency lifeboat for one of the airships? Who really knows?
But when they said he had frog's legs, so they're just saying he was making a frog swimming movement?
Yeah,
or he actually had frog's legs?
No, I think that's the impression that they're trying to give, that he was kind of moving in that frog kind of fashion, but rather than him actually having frog's legs. But that expression, Ben, comes up in a more recent case. There's a case that comes from June the 17th in 2005, where there was a Horatio Roque. He filmed a flying humanoid in a seating position atop some type of device over Mexico City. Roque was out with his sister. It was the middle of the afternoon. It was a clear day, and they both saw this tall humanoid figure that was cruising through the air. And when they made eye contact with it, apparently it leered at them menacingly. The figure seemed to be perched atop some gravity-defying device. It emitted a red glow, and its legs were dangling beside it underneath. This expression, 100 years later, more than 100 years later, and it's the same kind of thing. So I got this feeling, though, that I thought when this kind of activity takes place, there's always something that's associated with it. And there's a theory out there, and this is what I was reading today, is that if you buy into this idea that the Earth has some type of like a pan energy about it, that there's some type of ephemeral consciousness that manifests in paranormal phenomena when bad things are about to happen, is that they're omens. And so this could be fitting into that kind of category of stuff, because we have to go to UFO Clearinghouse from June the 7th, this report came in. But it relates to a pilot who asked to keep his name anonymous.
June the 7th this year.
June the 7th this year. So he claims that he was flying into O'Hare International Airport. It was 7:30 a.m. in the morning. He said they'd just landed. They were taxiing from the runway towards the terminal when he claims that he spotted something out of the corner of his eye. He said he turned to see a large, black, human-like creature fly up and into the sky. Now, he said he only saw this creature for a short period of time. He said it was about 4 seconds before it flew up. But he said he grabbed hold of his co-pilot. He's like, look, and shouted at it. And he said the co-pilot managed to catch a glimpse of it and confirmed that he had seen the same thing. They were both awestruck, he said, by this sighting, and it left them dumbfounded. Now, he says that he actually reported this incident to the tower, who made note of it, but he said nothing else became of it. He said, look, the rest of the flight was uneventful, and later on he brought it up with his colleagues, and what really shocked him was that several other pilots said that they had seen or heard from other pilots that had seen exactly the same thing. Now, the last time that...
Is this guy on the record? Do we have his name?
No, unfortunately, the details. It just comes from a UFO Clearinghouse report from June the 7th, but it even says here that he's a pilot for redacted, so his name wasn't included. And I kind of get it, though. I mean, if you're a pilot, you don't want to be making announcements that you're seeing humanoids at an airport.
I feel like I need to play the "Is it real?" clip.
Look, that question does come in. But these things sort of happen in waves. This activity kind of takes place. And while obviously the flying humanoid with a jetpack is a little bit different to some type of, winged humanoid showing up, it's this same phenomena. Now, the last time that there was strange humanoids being seen flying over locations, it was when the Mothman sighting took place. I mean, the last time a real bad thing happened, and the bridge collapsed after that. So some people were speculating, that I was reading today, that this is an ominous sign for the direction that the Earth is going at the moment. And you know what, though? It's pretty easy to make that conclusion, given that, 2020 has not been a great year. Not for anyone. It's been a pretty unhappy year.
Anything could be an omen for a shitty year.
Yeah, exactly. But let's go back into the history, though, of more of these more technical style cases. And there's a really great case that comes from Washington State all the way back from 1948, and it relates to a Bernice Zukowski. Now, she was standing outside her farmhouse. This is on the outskirts of a small town in Washington State. And she said something in the air attracted her attention. She looked up and she saw a man flying about 20 feet above her barn. She said he was flying vertically, but kept aloft by a set of what appeared to be massive silver wings. She said the wings were fastened to some kind of harness. She heard a strange whizzing or a whirring sound, like it was mechanical. But she said that she was watching, and this man was reaching up to his chest and kind of adjusting dials that were on the harness to allow him to move. Now, it was after 3 p.m., and apparently some school children had just left school. They had seen this thing in the distance and went up to her and said, "Can we walk through your garden to get a better look at this flying man?" And they did. So it wasn't only her sighting. It was validated by other children that saw the same thing. And what is odd about this is that it seems like what is typical with paranormal phenomena, and the point that I was trying to make before, is that it never really happens in isolation. It might be an isolated incident for the person witnessing it, but from a researcher's perspective, when you start putting things together, you see that there are these flaps that take place. And these sightings took place, it was only after, it was apparently in Washington State at the time, there was a massive sightings that took place around that time. And what is odd, and it's just a weird synchronicity that pops up, is that the plane that was flown by the Air Force officers that were investigating the Maury Island sighting that had happened 3 months earlier, that plane had only crashed a couple of miles away from her home. So is there a connection there, or is it just a weird synchronicity? I mean, it's no direct connection, but it is odd that you have these synchronicities showing up. So keeping in mind that idea of these things being associated with UFO activity, you actually can find a great report from John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. He describes a really bizarre scene that played out on July the 28th in 1966. This happened in Louisville, Kentucky. And the two witnesses, one was named C.A. Youngman and the other was Ben Flexner. They were out taking this stroll on this clear, calm afternoon when they saw something that was quite odd in the sky above them. Now, at first, they took it to be a toy balloon, and that kind of would make sense. But they said as they approached, they could see that it happened to be a man that was surrounded by machinery that, like the previous case, he was working with his hands. He had some kind of wings and fans perched upon his back, and he was working these dials that seemed to be at the front of his chest yet again. Now, the following evening, several UFO sightings took place where a bright object was seen hopping over Madisonville, Kentucky before disappearing. Again, there's no direct connection to these flying men, but it's odd that you have a sighting of one of these flying humanoids and then UFO activity taking place very rapidly after it. Connection? Maybe. But it's not just limited to the United States. As I said, these events were taking place all around the world, and there are some reports that come from behind the Iron Curtain, from Soviet Russia. And there's a report that comes from 1978. There was a 14-year-old by the name of Grubsky. Now, he was on vacation with his family and some friends in the Ryazan region of Russia. And it was this foggy evening when, again, he was out walking with his friends. There were two boys. And he saw a series of these bright, multicolored flashes. Now, after they saw these flashes, they heard a mechanical drone that seemed to be approaching their position from behind a nearby hill. Now, through the mist and fog, they said they could see this shadowy figure coming towards them. It was about 20 meters up in the air, and it continued until it passed overhead. Now, when it passed overhead, they said they could make out that it was a flying man with his arms outstretched. Now, the witnesses would describe the figure as wearing some type of metallic silvery suit with metal rings around its limbs and torso. It also, listen to this, had a belt-like contraption with a control panel embedded into it, which he was working. Now, they also said that he seemed to be wearing some type of backpack. It looked like it had oxygen tanks, which to a kid, I guess, you know, especially back then, you would think that it was just maybe scuba outfit or something, but it was more likely to be some type of propulsion device. It had a series of tubes that were coming out in what appeared to be air inlets. There were no straps that were visible, but there was some type of membrane that was attached from the fingers back to the belt. It's like a flight suit.
Is there mention of helmets in these sightings?
Yeah, there is actually. The boy said that he was wearing some type of helmet and what looked to be some type of respirator. But they said, look, they don't know exactly what happened, but all they noticed is that this creature headed back to where they had seen the light flashes, and this thing seemed to disappear into the flash.
Wait, so why is it a creature?
Well, but when I say it's a creature, it's an entity. It's a humanoid. They can't tell exactly what it is because they can't see behind the mask.
It could have been just a man.
It could have been just a man, absolutely. But in 1978, with some type of anti-gravity flying apparatus,
yes,
it's very unusual. It fits in with the cases that are appearing around the world. So let's go back to a case that happens in April of 1948. And this was in the same general vicinity of the Washington case that I told you before. But this relates to Viola Johnson and James Pittman. So Viola Johnson and James Pittman, they worked for this, it was a laundry or a cleaning company or something like that. And she was outside when she heard this noise overhead. And she looks up and she claims that she can see three men in these dull flying suits, like these dull grey, almost army uniform style flying suits. And she said they were making circles over the laundry at a height of around 250 feet. She said that they were going at the same speed as a freight train, but they had some kind of apparatus on their sides that looked like guns. But she's like, that can't be a gun, but she didn't know what to make of it. She said she couldn't see any propellers or any motors tied on, but she could hear propellers and motors which is strange. Like, it was almost like they were giving out some type of false sound. And that comes up, that plays an important role in a story I'm going to tell you a little bit later on, because that seems to be quite typical in some UFO sightings and some humanoid sightings, where they project a sound and you don't actually see the source of it. It's almost like it's some type of camouflage or imitation, but they just never get it right. But they said that when these things came clearly into view, at first, in the distance, she said she thought that they were gulls, but she can plainly see that they were men. She said their feet were dangling down over the sides and they kept moving their heads like they were looking around for something. She said they couldn't tell if they had any goggles, but they definitely had helmets on. So she ran inside and she tried to get James Pittman, or she tried to get everyone to come out and see these things flying overhead. And James was the only one that got out in time, but he validated what she had seen. So there was some backup. There was a slight little difference because he thought he saw wings or something like that.
What's the time period for this one again?
So this is 1948 again. And it was only a short distance from the previous Washington case. So you have to wonder, why do these sightings happen in the same area? Is it testing? Is it that it is a group of breakaway scientists that are testing something?
I'll tell you what's going on. And I saw a post from someone on Twitter, and I can't remember their name, but it's a guy whose whole account is he just reads a bunch of books and he just posts weird, interesting quotes he finds in these books. And today I saw a post where he was explaining that people over the last kind of 100 plus years have been traveling all over the world. Since the invention of steamships, people have been traveling all over the place.
Yeah.
And people have traveled quite easily with suitcases. But it wasn't until, I think it was 1983 or something, if I could guess from memory, that someone figured out to put wheels on a suitcase. And then it didn't catch on until, I think it was 1989 or something, that people started going, oh, this is a good idea. Let's put wheels on our suitcases. Before that,
fascinating.
Everyone was fine lugging their giant
luggage.
Suitcases around.
Yeah.
So you got to tell me there wasn't a guy out there in 1903 who thought, you know what? I'm putting wheels on my suitcases.
And that is your breakaway civilization technology.
That's the jetpack guy. He's just 100 years ahead of everyone else. So you're telling me across the world there isn't some genius who has figured out? There wouldn't even be one guy. Right. There could be dozens of guys who've worked out propulsion, different types of propulsion, different types of...
Whether it's anti-gravitic or whether it's, combustion, it doesn't matter. It just has to be a little bit more advanced. But the question is, why haven't... if you're a scientist and you invent something like that, which could revolutionize the world...
Yeah.
Does there come a point where, you're all excited, think, I have to share this with the world, and then you start writing, and you're like, I'm not sharing this with anyone.
I can answer that as well. It's because there was only ever one flight.
Because it crashed.
Because they crashed and died, obviously.
Well, then why haven't we found the dead bodies and the crashed vehicles?
There was nothing left. It was just mist when they hit the ground.
No, they've probably got some, Marty McFly, young bloke working for them, but he's covering it up for them. Just burying them in the spot, waiting for Erich von Däniken or Pablo Escobar to dig them up 100 years from now. Look, still in Russia, though, and I really like it when you hear these reports coming out of Russia because, they've been hidden for so long. And we're talking Soviet Russia. There's a report from 1978 that happened in Georgia, and it happened in February of that year. And it was late one evening when a militia captain, he woke up in his home, and he looked outside and he could see this bright light. And he said this bright light was being followed by two strange objects that looked like giant black birds. So he went outside because this is an incredible sight to see. So he runs outside and he says that he realized that while they look like birds, they weren't actual wings. So I wonder if they're, again, like this membrane, like this mechanical membrane, which is described in many of the cases. But he said these two objects descended lower until they were close enough that he could see that they were humanoid beings in tight-fitting suits with helmets. Again, helmets. So obviously they must be humans. Because why are they wearing helmets?
It's the tight-fitting silver suits that make me think it's aliens with jetpacks.
Yeah, that's true. It is a little bit
So many UFO encounters describe silvery, tight-fitting suits.
Well, actually, in this particular case, he said that even though they were wearing helmets, their faces were exposed. But he said they had frog-like faces. They were humanoid, but they still had these kind of frog features. He doesn't detail exactly what they are. But he said the next part of this was shocking. He claims that when these two winged entities landed, they produced a tablet and forced it down his throat. They then took off into the distance while emitting a mechanical whirring sound. The witness then claims that he lost all memory, and the next thing he knew, he woke up in bed with a case of missing time.
That sounds more like aliens.
It is, but again, I mean, what is it if you're advanced enough to have some type of flight suit? Why is it that the way that you abduct people is by landing and shoving a pill down their throat?
Dude, on the last show, we were talking about Sasquatches remote controlled by ETs and they have their own docking chair aboard the UFOs.
So wouldn't you have some type of soporific technology to put people to sleep rather than shoving a pill down their throat when you land? Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's a screen memory taking place in some of these things because it's just such a surreal report. And of course, you can't rule out the possibility that the guys just made it up. But if it genuinely did happen, you have to question...
Is it real?
Yeah. Well, just the weirdness of why is it in so many of these stories, again, like if when you look at the bigger picture, why is it that they always just seem to have really useless technologies? Like they can fly through space and yet they're serving up pills. It's just mind-boggling to me. So let's move over to Greece now. And this case comes from 1989. It was October of that year. There was a shop owner who was driving home one evening in Lados. This is the Rhodes Island in Greece. His wife was looking out his window, and she noticed this low-flying form that looked like a man dressed in all white, but covered with hair, possessing wings where its arms should be.
Whoa. Back up. Covered in hair.
Covered in hair. Like
Dressed in all white.
Dressed in all white. Like some type of flying white-suited Bigfoot.
Yeah.
With wings.
Like some kind of 70s disco dancing outfit.
Yeah.
Bigfoot
Look,
with a jetpack.
The report says that this would have been startling enough as it was, but mounted upon its back was some sort of device that seemed to be enabling it to fly. It was not moving its wings at all. The bizarre apparition looked directly at the witnesses before accelerating in a direction towards a local mountain.
When he went off in the other direction, was he like...
It's not included in the report, but I'm going to say yes.
Did he come and do a couple of loops? Was he totally out of control?
I'm sure he was. He's just obviously an incompetent idiot. And then...
Did they find a open jar of peanut butter at the scene?
Just strewn across the ground after it had smashed and fallen. You know what? When I described that earlier case where it seemed like there were these light flashes that were seen and then this flying humanoid seemed to descend back into the lights, that's repeated in another case that comes from Greece. This time it was from Athens. It was 1998. It was the 14th of September that year, and there were two women that were sitting out on a balcony, and it was around sunset, they say, when they saw or they spied this object that was headed directly towards them. They said, at first they took it to be a helicopter, but which was odd because it wasn't emanating any sound. But as it got closer, they could see that it was actually a humanoid being, again, in an upright position. The same style of position that was reported back in the 1940s case in Washington.
Like a jetpack.
Well, it's like they're sitting on some type of apparatus. It's like a little scooter that they're sitting upright on, which is the same things that comes out of the reports in some of the cases from Mexico. You know, there were all those flying humanoid reports from the early 2000s that came out of Mexico and over Mexico City, and it seems like they were flying around in these little scooter type things.
Well, if you watch the Jetpack company's Dubai video, we'll put in the show notes. Before he does the big takeoff, he's demonstrating just hovering
vertically.
That exact position.
Yeah, in this upright position before, he takes off. Now, in this particular case, they said when these humanoid beings got closer, they appeared to be wearing some type of astronaut suit. It's the only way that they could describe it. But they said this odd humanoid figure descended and landed at a park nearby. It did a couple of hops towards a forest that wasn't too far away, like the other UFO report where there was seemingly like hopping effects taking place. This creature then seemed to hover for a moment and then transformed into a bright spot of light and then vanished. So you've got, it's not just that it's a humanoid form. And yeah, there could be a possibility that these are mad scientists or breakaway scientists, but then you've got this added layer of this, interdimensional technology? Is it transporter technology? Why are they flashing away?
Come on, man. It's time travelers from the future.
I knew you'd say that. And that is actually one thing that I was looking into today, where I was trying to find if there were any time traveling tourists. Or
that's how you start your research every day.
Look, it's a good reason. It explains what is going on here. So people are just simply going from the future. Look, I don't really believe that that's taking place. I think it's more likely one of two things is happening. Is that this genuinely is people, like you've said, Ben, that have developed technologies that are trialing them, or it's some type of screen memory or manifestation of something that's more esoteric that we just don't have an ability to comprehend at all. But to finish these particular reports, we have to head back to Mexico City. And this is one of the most bizarre reports that I've actually ever covered. And I don't even know, Ben, if we've ever looked into this before. It happened on the 14th of February, and it relates to a woman by the name of Ana Lucia Sid. And there were two other people with her, and their names, unfortunately, aren't included in this case. But they saw this unearthly sight. They said in the sky was what appeared to be a strange object that at first looked like some sort of mechanical machine. It was vibrating, but underneath it, there was dangling this large black humanoid shape, and it seemed to be hovering directly below it. Now, to make matters more bizarre, a smaller object was allegedly seen to drift from the lower part of it up to the top and merge with a larger figure, after which it detached from the upper structure and revealed itself to be some sort of humanoid wearing a cloak or a cape that was just flapping in the wind as this thing was hovering around. It was then reported that the small object broke off from the cloaked creature and flew off into the distance. The cloaked creature just hung around for a moment, reattached itself to a winged monster that was above it, and then took off out of sight. This case came to be known as the Entity Reunion in the Sky, and it's one of the strangest sightings ever to take place, not only in the Mexican skies, but in any of these reports, these strange flying humanoid reports that come out. And so it wasn't a singular person. 3 people swore that they saw this thing. So what are these things?
Balloons.
Yeah.
Mylar balloons.
A Mylar balloon. And that's what you will believe it is, and you will not ask any more questions. So where I'll depart from here, and I'll link to all these reports in the show notes at mysteriousuniverse.org. Brent Swanson has written up some great reports. So has Nick Redfern. There's some really, really intriguing reports in there. But I want to go now to this strange connection that I got from a Brett Tingley article over at The Drive, over at the War Zone. And this relates to a strange incursion event, a UFO incursion event that took place back in 1975 at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. Apparently, this Air Force Base was invaded by a mysterious craft that originated from Canadian airspace. Now, at the time, the reason why this is a really intriguing case is at the time, the base was home to B-52 bombers and KC-135 tankers that were tasked with nuclear alert missions. So what that means is that there were nuclear weapons on board the B-52s. There was also an ammo dump that had nuclear weapons there as well. And there is a lot of stories, and we've covered some of them, Ben, of UFOs showing up over nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants, and nuclear weapons stores, and interacting with them, interacting with nuclear missiles, interacting and disabling nuclear missiles. And you have to question, why are extraterrestrials doing this? What interest do they have in their nuclear weapons? And of course, the military is fascinated by it because it means that one of the most advanced weapons that they have can just simply be switched off, and they have no way to defend against it. They can't protect themselves. So in this particular story, all began on the night of October the 27th, back, as I said, in 1975. And it was near the munitions storage area, which is located on the northern perimeter of the flight line. This is where these nuclear weapons were stored in igloo-type huts. They were covered with dirt camouflage to keep them away from anything that might be spying overhead. It's a highly restricted location to both ground and air, anything. But at around 7:45 p.m., Staff Sergeant Danny Lewis was on duty at the dump when he spotted what he thought was an unidentified aircraft, but he thought it was just an aircraft, not a UFO, that was flying along the northern perimeter of the base. But he said he could see this red navigational light underneath and a white strobe light that was on the craft. Now, at the same time, Staff Sergeant James Sampley, who was part of the communications squadron, he was in the control tower, and he also observed this unknown aircraft. Now, numerous attempts were made to radio the aircraft because it needed to be identified. It was entering restricted airspace over the base. All communication bands, military and civilian, were used in an attempt to contact this unknown aircraft, but it was without results. And this unknown aircraft then began to circle. And at one point, it came within 300 yards of the nuclear storage facility with an altitude of 150 feet. So the moment that this happened, the base commander, the commander of the 42nd Bomb Wing, implemented Security Option 3, which is this major status alert, and the entire base within 6 minutes descended into this alert state of madness because there was this unidentified craft that was flying over nuclear weapons. There was a Sergeant Grover Eccleston who was looking at radar screens at the time. He noticed that this aircraft, while it was circling, he said it suddenly just disappeared. It either dropped below radar, which would have been unusual for it to do so, or it actually disappeared. And that's where this strange kind of inclination starts popping in that there's something more going on here than it just being terrestrial technology or even being a foreign actor. There has to be something else. So the wing commander then, when he arrived at the weapons storage area, this was 7 minutes after the initial sighting was made. He said that it was said that he got police in, obviously, military police to go and inspect the area. Security vehicles showed up. The base was, converging everywhere. And he contacted NORAD asking for fighter support. But for some reason, this fighter support was denied. And no one knows why. This is a military base storing nuclear weapons. They're requesting fighter support, and NORAD denies it. So the wing commander increased a local security posture. He requested assistance from the local police, the actual civilian police, and they presumed that this thing was some type of helicopter. Huge amounts of investigations took place and all actions produced no result. They said the last thing that occurred on this particular evening was that the craft broke its circling pattern and it flew off towards Grand Falls, New Brunswick in Canada. No further events took place that evening, but the base remained on high alert, and this was for the rest of the night. And they were wondering, could this have just been an aircraft that had strayed off course? But if so, then why, when it was challenged by the tower, didn't it respond?
Well, if NORAD didn't send any backup, then it suggests that they knew what it was. It was theirs, or they knew they couldn't do anything about it.
The second one, I reckon. It's the latter. And the point is made that most pilots carry charts that show restricted areas that they can't fly over. So why would this thing not only fly over it? It's bad enough, if you have a pilot, but it's forgivable that you have a pilot that makes a mistake and he flies over restricted airspace. And it's still a no-no, but, you can understand. The fact that this thing was just circling, almost taunting them, was very unusual. Now, the unknown craft, as I said, they believed it was a helicopter, not because of the way that it looked, but rather because of the way that it moved. Apparently, it was making these very aerodynamically extreme maneuvers that obviously certainly couldn't be done by a conventional aircraft, but also kind of defied the possibilities for a helicopter, even by today's standards. So you can see where this starts fitting in with it being a UFO. Now, look, what I'm going to do is there is actually a full report that was done by the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. It's a 2007 report. It was done by Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can read the full report for yourself. Because what essentially happens, I'm just going to summarize this for you, is that this goes on for 2 or 3 nights. This craft seemingly taunting them and playing this weird game of cat and mouse. But there's a few factors that pop up that tie in with some of the other stories that I've told you on this show. The first thing is that one of the sergeants that was involved in looking into this, he said that he finally got a look at this thing. He said he was about 150 feet away, if less, as this thing was hovering. It was on the ground. And he said it would have been about 5 feet from the ground. So it was just hovering very, very low. He said this object looked like the colors were blending together. And what he means by that is that this was a solid object. You couldn't hear any noise coming from it, but it's like if you were looking at waves of heat rising off the desert floor. He said it was about twice the size of a helicopter. He said you couldn't see any doors or windows. There were no propellers and no engines that would keep this thing in the air. But somehow it was being kept in the air. Now, the sergeant that saw this, apparently he wasn't supposed to be in this particular location at the time. And within moments after seeing this thing, apparently the base went back into alert mode and he took off. He just got out of there because he didn't want to get himself into trouble. But this is where the base was convinced that this was something else. This was something concerning. So I've got a little bit of audio for you here that comes from maybe a briefing that happened on the base. So with this, the commander of the base at the time, this was Colonel Chapman. He was the commander of the 42nd Bomb Wing. He had actually requested that there would be air support come in from the National Guard helicopter crew that was there. So essentially what this did is it federalized the National Guard helicopter so he could deploy it. And before he did this, he apparently got a whole heap of people together on the base, about 200 people that were on the base. And he started saying to them that, look, if you've got anything less than a secret security clearance, leave the room now. And according to Michael Wallace, who was a former KC-135 tanker pilot, so he was there on the base when all this was taking place, he describes this strange briefing that happened where they were told that, look, there's a UFO on the base. It seems to be harassing us. And you all need to be aware of it because we're going to execute a mission. Now, I have some audio here that ties in with this cover-up where Michael describes what they were told they were supposed to tell the press.
And we were told, don't talk to anybody about it. If you have one of these incidents, you can talk to us and we'll be debriefing you. But outside of this room, don't talk about it. And we're also concerned that the local press is going to get wind of all the extra ground forces and the fighters that we're bringing in to help us deal with this issue. So we're going to tell them that there's a Canadian helicopter crossing the border and harassing us.
A Canadian helicopter.
What? How is that a better story?
Yeah, well, I mean, it could potentially spark an international incident.
Yeah.
And just say, no. And the thing is, apparently the Canadians had given permission to the Americans to follow this thing into their airspace. So it definitely was, but obviously when it comes to the media, it's like, oh no, it's just some silly leaf that doesn't know what they're doing. Like, come on, like this is really absurd. But again, it's the Cold War, so you've got to keep everything hush-hush. But so what happened, which was really fascinating about Michael Wallace, and Michael Wallace has a full YouTube video describing the events that took place around that time. And after he had this briefing, there were two things that were taking place. He was claiming that he was out on a mission in his KC-135 tanker. There were 3 tankers that were flying. And as they're flying along and they were out doing their mission, the mission was completely uneventful until they were coming back to the base. And he was in the second tanker as they were flying back. And all he hears over the radio is the tower contact the first tanker and say to the tanker, you need to go into radio silence, you need to turn your lights off, and you need to get back to the base right now because we have a mission for you. And Michael Wallace apparently changed his radio frequency because he wanted to listen to what he was being told to do. And he claims they heard something along the lines of, the UFO is back and we need you back here to be able to perform this mission. He doesn't know what the mission is because he said he then gets a call and he's told, you're now leading the flight. And he says he watches as this tanker just turns off its lights, goes into radio silence, and then just disappears into the night sky. Now, he says from his report, he doesn't know exactly what ended up happening. But when he finally got back to the base and landed, he said he was having a couple of drinks. He said he went looking for this pilot, and the pilot was nowhere to be seen, but he was being debriefed at the time for whatever this mission took place. And he says a couple of days later, as he's driving along the base past the base exchange, he said he saw him, and he went running up to him. He pulled over and ran up to him. He's like, what was that? What did you see? And amazingly, all he gets out of this pilot is that, I cannot tell you what happened, but you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Now, there is a little bit, and that's like a bit of a tease, right? As you hear that, I'm like, it's really disappointing, but this is all the information he has. There was a little bit of a follow-up that comes from that investigation document that I was describing earlier. And some reports come through that apparently what had happened was that when this UFO had shown up on another night, they had deployed that helicopter, that National Guard helicopter, and that National Guard helicopter was racing around the base, spending 40 minutes trying to chase this UFO. And what was weird is it seemed like the UFO would appear in one location and then suddenly show up in the totally opposite direction. It was
just toying with it.
It was playing this game of cloaked cat and mouse. But one thing that comes out of it, which is really amazing and really fascinating and typical, though, for this UFO activity, is that the ground personnel were calling up to the aircraft and they were saying, look, it's at this location. The radar wasn't showing it, but the ground personnel could see it. So people on the ground could actually see this thing. The radar wasn't detecting it at all. But they finally caught up with this thing. And they say when they caught up with it, they could hear it. Like this is the strange thing. They could actually hear it. People on the ground were saying that they could see it, but from the helicopter, they couldn't see it. So it's like, again, this weird cloaking mechanism that's taking place. Just a whole complete mind screw that is typical for what was happening with this UFO activity out there. And they said, look, this UFO was less than 100 feet from us, yet you couldn't see it. They did a sweep. They could never find it. Now, eventually, this whole thing just went away. The lid commander said that we have to keep a lid on this because, look, we've had someone penetrate around the bomb dump and we can't defend against it. And so very quickly, this all got locked away and hidden as part of the Cold War.
Yeah, that's why NORAD didn't bother. Then you can't do anything. Well, they can't stop them. They do what they want.
Exactly. And it's certainly not foreign. It was almost like this feeling of once they confirmed that, it's one of these extraterrestrials, they weren't concerned.
Maybe there was a Canadian pilot just saying, what are you going to do, eh? What are you going to do?
Possibly. Very, very possibly. But look, it's in far greater detail on the drive from Brett's article. I'll also link to the audio from the YouTube channel. And it's a really fascinating story. And it's great that stories like this are coming out. Like, it's demonstrating that we're not in control here.
So back to the initial sighting of the Jetpack, which is now a balloon. Do you think we'll hear any more from this story?
I think we will, but I think one of two things for me potentially can happen. Yeah, it's just some dumb stunt. Or secondly, it'll take 30 years and it will eventually come out of more details about what people actually saw. And it will probably fit in with things that are more in line with high strangeness than it being something that's conventional.
I don't think you can buy them. The jetpacks.
Right. So
I think it's just an experience they're selling. I don't think they're manufacturing them for sale. It just keeps saying very limited spots for a jetpack experience.
Yeah, they must be.
Surely, if you threw a bunch of money at them, that would give you one.
Yeah, exactly. And I must say, as I said before, I thought Elon Musk, this could be part of him, but I saw that he was in Germany. So
why did Elon
you
Musk?
see him?
He's not freaking Iron Man.
I don't know.
He's not flying around in a jetpack.
I don't know. Well, you're right though. With people with enough money, like let's say that you're even a YouTube star and you've got enough money and you think that it's a good idea to do it, and then it backfires because you find out that you could bring in a commercial aircraft.
Anyone that's flying this thing without a year or more of training is just dead.
That's a good point. Yeah, so you'd have to be an accomplished pilot to fly one of these things. It's not easy.
If it is just a person with some kind of jetpack, I would say the likeliness of it being just some person is almost zero. It's more likely that it would be a foreign state.
Oh, possibly. Look, and this is why, though. I mean, you asked why the LAPD. The LAPD is the authority in that area, so they will look into potentially anyone who's gone to that flight school. I'm sure that's what will happen.
The reason I was saying LAPD is that it sounds like an Air Force or, NSA or what's the other one? The Department of Homeland Security should be looking at it.
Yeah,
because it could be a potential terrorist attack. And that's why they're perhaps calling it a balloon for now, because maybe it was an attempted terrorist attack.
Maybe, but then why would a terrorist take the time to learn to fly? Like, it's a bad way to commit a terrorist attack. Like, you spend all this time and money trying to fly in a jetpack that can't fly.
How would you blow up a plane, Aaron?
Oh, I wouldn't. And you're not luring me into that trap so that my door gets kicked in. So no.
Everything on this show is satire, by the way, for any CIA glowies listening. Everything is satire.
Everything. Absolutely everything.
So do you want to find out what happened to Erich von Däniken in Colombia on this telephone call?
Absolutely.
He's on the phone with American Express. American Express is basically saying, look, your first-class flights to Colombia are all paid for by an anonymous benefactor, who he knows as Pablo Escobar. Just all you need to do is let us know your passport numbers and, the names and passports of the people that will be flying with you, which, as Escobar said, he wanted 2 Swiss journalists, a notary, and a camera crew. And von Däniken thinks about it. And he just starts yelling into his phone.
That's live audio too. That's real.
He did not want to go on a expedition with the world's most dangerous drug lord.
Oh, okay. Well then, yeah, I guess I get that. But hang on a second.
Part of me was like, God damn you, Erich von Däniken, because that would have made an amazing story, hanging out with Pablo Escobar on a dig for alien skulls in Colombia.
Maybe he didn't believe it though as well. Maybe when he saw the skull, maybe it wasn't enough for him. I mean, imagine if it was real, it would be the conclusion to his life's work. It would be a triumphant conclusion to his life's work.
Yeah, he said he didn't want to have anything to do with the drug dealer, but, he refused this invitation, didn't answer any more questions from the travel agency. But he said, I remained very curious about the deformed skulls. And he said, I just couldn't get those pictures of the baby skulls without the fontanelle out of my mind. He just couldn't forget it. And he starts asking these questions. Did they provide the first solid proof of visiting extraterrestrials? Were ancient alien heads really present on our planet? And could this be clearly demonstrated by modern DNA analysis? What are these heads really, he asks? Are they deformed skulls? Where can they be observed? How did they take on their form? How old are they? And what does science know about them? So, yes, a missed opportunity by digging in the ground with Escobar.
Potentially probably avoided a very difficult situation.
But ultimately, the quest wasn't over for von Däniken, and he wanted to find out more about these skulls. So when we come back after the break for our Plus extension, we're going to figure out the thread that von Däniken followed, the research he did with these skulls, how he was eventually convinced that some of these elongated skulls that, again, you can see in museums all over the world, could in fact be ancient extraterrestrial relics. And we're going to find out how this relates to a very smelly old man's giant finger in Egypt, and why it took years for a German man to get over the experience of paying for the experience. That's all coming up in our Plus extension. Head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus for all the details. You get access to the massive extensions on the end of these shows every single Friday, and you get an exclusive show every single Tuesday. There's a concurrently running season exclusive to Plus members. You're getting more than double the content if you sign up for Plus, and if you're a Plus member, you get a higher quality audio version of the show. You get a totally ad-free experience of the podcast. You get all the features of our apps unlocked as well, and you get discounts off digital products in our store with the discount on your dashboard if you're a Plus member. Check it out, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. It's $9 a month and helps support this show.
Yeah, because I need a jetpack.
We
you
both
can actually
need
buy them.
jetpacks.
You can buy them. I found it.
Seriously?
Yeah, I found it. It does say price available upon private request.
At jetpackaviation.com.
Yep, jetpackaviation.com/jetpacks. You can buy the JB10 or JB11 jetpacks.
See, if it was a guy with a jetpack, you could just look at their customer list, which is probably
Exactly, what the
less than
LAPD will do.
50.
Yeah.
And you can find out who was flying around the air traffic lanes, which is pretty stupid. Well, we'll find out the end to that mystery maybe on the next show, but make sure you sign up for Plus for all the amazing stuff coming up after the break. We're going to go into giants. We're going to go into ancient skulls. We're going to find out what happened to von Däniken in South America. mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. If you're a free listener, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you same time next week. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to your Plus extension. Good to have you.